Honorable ambassadors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, hello and good morning. I'm Shanim Tasneem in this beautiful morning where Bangladesh is about to finish its glorious 50 years. We are here, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to today's Dhaka Tribune panel discussion on Bangladesh as current and future regional and global player, supported by Royal Norwegian Embassy. Before the discussion begins, let me introduce you to our special guests and honorable panelists. As our special guest today, we are honored to have the ambassador of Royal Norwegian Embassy, His Excellency Espen Rikter-Svendsen. In our panel, we are honored to have Mr. Kazi Nabil Ahmed, MP, Member of Parliamentary Standing Committee on Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Farooq Sobhan, former Foreign Secretary, Bir Bikram, Mr. Shamsher Chowdhury, former Foreign Secretary, Ms. Ayesha Kabir, Editor Pratham Alo English, Mr. Shafiqul AFP Bureau Chief, and Dr. Fahmida Khatun, Executive Director, CPD. And today's panel discussion will be moderated by the editor of Dhaka Tribune, Mr. Zafar Sobhan. First of all, I'd like to welcome and thank our honorable panelists and moderator for taking their time to be part of this discussion. Now, for the opening speech, I'd like to request our special guest, His Excellency Espen Rikter-Svendsen, Ambassador of the Royal Norwegian Embassy, to join us on the stage here.
Distinguished panelists, excellencies, and guests here present, good morning to all of you. It's such a pleasure to be here on this very auspicious occasion and to have this panel discussion on what is a very important topic and on the very significant occasion of the Golden Jubilee year of Bangladesh's independence. Norway was among the first countries to recognize Bangladesh independence. It happened on the 4th of February in 1972. The Bangladeshi independence struggle was followed very keenly by Norwegians, and there was an outpour of sympathy for the new nation in Norway. That deep sympathy set the tone for our cooperation after independence, and our cooperation has been broad and deep, spanning a multitude of sectors. Starting out with emergency food aid, gradually turning into regular development assistance under the status of main development partner, and gradually more into commercial and economic cooperation, including Norwegian commercial investments. Bangladesh has always had, and still has, a large number of good and true friends in Norway. As Norway's ambassador to Bangladesh, I am tasked with the challenge of analyzing and explaining the country to my masters in Norway, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and elsewhere in the government. One question that keeps popping up more and more is that of Bangladesh's role as a country in a complex world and a troubled region. How does the country act in order to secure its interests while maximizing the benefits from international interaction? And how does Bangladesh act in relation to the shifting dynamics in the global and regional balance of power? More specifically, how does Bangladesh balance its relations with major powers in the region and elsewhere in a period where relations between these major powers are under increasing strain? Located smack in the middle of Asia, on the border between South Asia and Southeast Asia, Bangladesh knows very well that geography matters. There is India to the left, there is China up to the right, there is ASEAN down to the right, there is the Himalayas up above, sending huge amounts of water through mega rivers, through Bangladesh into the Bay of Bengal. I amused myself by printing out a very Bangladesh-centered map where Dhaka, and Gulshan 2 is right in the middle. And I took my compass, made a circle, and I could see what is, of course, all of you know from before, but could see that, Dhaka is in the middle of everything. The distance to Bangkok is roughly the same as to Delhi, to Hanoi, to Chennai, and to Chengdu. And into this geographic canvas, we need to place things like politics, trade, economy, history, culture, and other elements in order to make sense of it all. But what is the situation now, today, and what could be the future developments? That, I must admit, is something I ask myself and others frequently, and that is what we will look into today. I'm extremely happy that we have managed on short notice to mobilize this very impressive group of insightful and experienced persons to engage in some loud thinking on these issues. My thanks go to all of you, but in particular to our friends at Dhaka Tribune and the editor Zafar Sobhan. We could not have done this without you. Thank you for partnering with us and doing a lot of work in a very short time. And to all of you present here, I encourage all of you to be very active participants, ask questions, mingle actively in the breaks and over lunch, and thus provide your valuable input. I wish all of you an inspiring and fruitful couple of hours here with us at the Doreen Hotel in Gulshan, right in the middle of Asia. Thank you.
Thank you, His Excellency, for your speech. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to request our moderator, Mr. Zafar Sobhan, to proceed with the main discussion.
Thank you very much for a wonderful scene-setting speech, Your Excellency. And I do want to thank the Norwegian Embassy for the support they're giving to this event. And not just that, when we sat down to brainstorm what we really wanted to discuss and what we thought would be the best subject of discussion, I have to say that this particular angle came from the embassy staff, and so I'm very pleased to be working closely with them. I think that this is a long overdue discussion. We've spent the last year celebrating our 50 years of independence, and I think we should spend more time focusing on what does it really mean for Bangladesh that, having gone through the last 50 years, what do the next 50 years portend for us? And I think one of the things which I would like our distinguished panelists to discuss here is, where do they see Bangladesh in the coming decades? Because one of the things we tend to forget about ourselves, which I think is now really changing over the last 5 or 10 years, is that contrary to popular opinion and perception, Bangladesh is not a small country. We're a large country in a small area perhaps, but there's 170 million people, and every year our importance and centrality is growing. And so how do we really project this on the global stage? Without further ado, I don't really want to speak too much. I'll turn it over to our panelists. We will start with opening statements from each one of our distinguished panelists, and then I'll have a bit of a discussion back and forth. After about an hour, I would like to open up the discussion to all of you in the audience. There are many distinguished guests here whose opinions and points of view would be very interested in hearing. And the whole point is, again, that this should be a discussion, a conversation. So I hope it's going to be fruitful. I hope you enjoy it as much as I expect that I will. Without further ado, let me start. I think seniority dictates that we go with former Foreign Secretary Farooq Sobhan. Why don't you get the ball rolling? Your opening batsman.
Thank you, Zafar. Excellencies, fellow panelists, editor of the Dhaka Tribune, ladies and gentlemen, assalamu alaikum, and a very good morning to all of you. I thought perhaps I should try and get this gathering into the right frame of mind. I would at the outset like to congratulate Zafar and the Dhaka Tribune for choosing a very auspicious day on the eve of the Golden Jubilee of our Victory Day. A very special day indeed. And I'm also delighted to see that he's been able to get so many of his friends together. I was inclined to think that we perhaps have the entire subscriber base of the Dhaka Tribune here this morning. But Zafar assures me that there are lots of online readers, so perhaps those who are not with us this morning will be able to follow this event online now. I do have a small issue with the title, unless we were given by His Excellency the Norwegian Ambassador some context. Perhaps some people may think that we are talking about Bangladesh becoming a regional or global player, perhaps in the field of cricket or football. But I think what is really meant is Bangladesh matching the prominence which it has achieved in the economic field to reflect that as, if you like, a major player both regionally and globally in terms of our standing, in terms of our position. I'm going to divide my remarks into three parts. The first is to try and provide some context in relation to the world today and indeed the prospects for the world tomorrow. And then zero in on where Bangladesh is currently positioned, both regionally and globally, and then conclude with some thoughts about what should Bangladesh be doing in order to match, if you like, our economic success with diplomatic and political success in the field of foreign relations and foreign affairs in general. Context. In my view, the world today is possibly the most dangerous world that we have seen since the end of the Second World War. I cannot recall a period of time when we have seen as many crises as are clearly evident today on the global scene. We have, of course, dominating this setting Sino-US relations. And at last count, I drew up a list of 10 issues on which the US and China are sharply divided. US-Russia relations and the looming tension over Ukraine, the troubled state of the Middle East, the turmoil in Africa, and indeed in our own neighborhood, we see trouble in Myanmar in particular, which obviously has a huge impact on on Bangladesh and our foreign relations. Initially, the focus had been on the Rohingya problem, and of course, in the case of Bangladesh, it still is. But also the fact that today Myanmar as a whole is in turmoil. And what does this mean for Bangladesh? In terms of, and then added to this scenario, we have the fallout from the COVID pandemic, a pandemic which we are still grappling with, which has had a profound impact also on the global economy. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that from Dr. Fahmida, where, to put it bluntly, globalization is on the retreat, multilateralism is on the retreat, and a beggar thy neighbor policy seems to be very much in evidence. This, of course, has had a huge impact in sharpening, if you like, the divisions that are emerging. I would even go so far as to say that we are on the edge of a second Cold War. Some might even argue that that Cold War has already begun. A central feature of which is, of course, pitting on the one side China and Russia versus on the other the US, India, Japan, the Quad, pitting, as it were, the Belt Road Initiative against the Indo-Pacific strategy. Clearly, this does pose a major challenge for Bangladesh. Bangladesh has been a strong advocate and supporter of multilateralism. We have been a strong supporter of the UN and the UN system. We are, as is well known, a leading contributor to UN peacekeeping missions, which has earned us a lot of praise. We are also at the forefront of the ongoing debate about climate change and global warming and what to do about it. And then we are also at the same time possibly one of the most successful countries economically in the developing world. We've been a strong advocate of regional cooperation, indeed regional economic integration in the Asia-Pacific region, in South Asia, in linking South Asia to Southeast Asia. We, as you know, played a critical role in the establishment of SAARC, which, alas, is now in the doldrums. We were active players from the start in BIMSTEC, and we played a key role in the formation of the BBIN, which at one time was known as the Growth Quadrangle, linking Bangladesh, India, Nepal, and Bhutan together. All these initiatives are at the moment in some ways suffering from the current global situation where, as I mentioned, rivalries have increased, tensions have increased, and there is increasing pressure on the smaller states, including Bangladesh, to take positions in favor of one grouping or the other. Our diplomacy so far has successfully steered us in a direction in keeping with what was the cornerstone of Bangladesh's foreign policy set out by Bangabandhu after our independence, friendship with all, malice to none. So we seek to maintain close relations with the various groupings, with our friends in Europe, in particular, I would say, with the Nordic countries with whom we've enjoyed a very special relationship from the very birth of Bangladesh. We've now tried to extend our diplomacy into Africa, and we have leveraged successfully our peacekeeping operations and the goodwill that it has brought us in Africa. And we are trying very hard to also strengthen our relations with the ASEAN countries. So while maintaining good relations with the major powers, we are seeking to broaden, if you like, our relations with the international community. My concluding thoughts are focused on the years ahead. Clearly, Bangladesh needs to rev up its diplomacy, particularly its economic diplomacy and its public diplomacy. The three great advantages which Bangladesh enjoys, apart from the success of our economy and all the indications, are that we will continue to march forward on an upward trajectory in terms of our economic growth. But how do we gain greater prominence? Well, I think we need to invest much more in our diplomacy, particularly in the fields of economic and public diplomacy. We need to expand the number of embassies, strengthen our diplomatic service, invest much more in reaching out to our ASEAN neighbors, who I think will have a key role to play, and continuing our efforts to promote, foster, and strengthen regional economic cooperation, regional economic integration in South Asia. And here I would say the building block approach, where we initially focus attention on our immediate neighbors, namely India, Bhutan, and Nepal, through BBIN, connectivity, energy cooperation, development of our water resources collectively, and learn, if you like, from the lessons of ASEAN. I think it's going to be very important for us to rev up our efforts to enter into free trade agreements. I believe we should try and become a member of RCEP, RCEP, which is going to be a major trading bloc. And similarly, we need to also strengthen our relations with various regional groupings and entities, in particular the European Union. There is a price, as you all know, which we have to pay for our graduation as an LDC. We are going to lose some of our market access benefits. And in order to qualify for GSP+, we will need to address a number of issues, including labor standards, human rights, as well as enter into a number of international covenants and agreements. To conclude, I would like to say that Bangladesh has enormous opportunities to further enhance its profile internationally and regionally, But there are challenges ahead, and we cannot ignore those challenges in terms of creating the wherewithal, being able to leverage effectively our diaspora, which is to me of enormous importance, but also to develop our own human resources, particularly in the field of diplomacy and foreign relations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for expertly setting the scene. I think your observations about the crucial period we are in historically are very well taken, as were your suggestions for how Bangladesh can move forward and position ourselves best within the geopolitical realities of the time. Now, without further ado, we are blessed to have not one but two former foreign secretaries with us. So if I could ask Shamsher Mubin Chowdhury Bir Bikram for your comments. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think thanks indeed to the Norwegian Embassy and Tribune for the timing of holding this seminar as we continue to celebrate 50 years of Bangladesh independence, and then now we look into the future, into the next 50 years. I would like to focus more on Bangladesh in the Asian context because it is the Asian age, as everybody knows, and then touch briefly on the more global part. If we get our own act right in Asia, I think we would be much better off. Mr. Chairman, the end of the Second World War saw the beginning of the Cold War and the concomitant emergence of an ideologically divided bipolar world, commonly known as the United States-led Western Bloc and the Soviet Union-led Eastern Blocs. The two blocs were backed by mutually opposing and belligerent military alliances, NATO and Warsaw Pact, respectively. Although the East-West bipolar political and geopolitical phenomena was primarily confined to the two sides of the Atlantic, with the divided Germany being at center stage, its impact on the geopolitics of Asia was also not minimal. The Korean and the Vietnam Wars between the 1950s and 70s and the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan in 1979 are stark reminders of how far the tentacles of the bipolar world had reached into our neighborhood. The fall of the Berlin Wall in early 1990s and the subsequent collapse of the Soviet Union brought to an end the era of a bipolar world and the advent of what one commonly believed to be a unipolar world and a peaceful world, with the United States being as a single world power. The traumatic events surrounding the Balkans, the sharply diverse positions among major stakeholders on more current issues like Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Iran, Syria, and indeed Ukraine, not to mention the divergent views on the Asia-Pacific domain, tells us that while the Cold War may have ended, wars had not. And the much-hyped peace dividends that was to follow the end of the Cold War has remained elusive. Now, the coming of the Asian age. The tectonic shifts that were shaking Europe of that period was also when key countries in Asia were emerging as economic and military powers. Principal among them were China and India, and followed closely by Japan. The fundamental difference here was that the emerging Asian powers focused mainly on the potentials of their economy and not necessarily on military alone as the principal tool for the manifestation of the growing global weight. Given the combined consumer base of India, China, and Japan, and the gradual rise in the market size and the buying power of the populations of other Asian countries, Bangladesh included, this was understandable. Notwithstanding the logic of this, it is equally true that no country would consider itself an economic power, not even a regional one, unless it had the military teeth to protect its national political and economic interests and be prepared to meet its perceived security threats and pursue its own geopolitical and foreign policy goals. It follows, therefore, that while both China and India and Japan focus primarily on strengthening their respective economies and leveraging that for roles beyond their frontiers, they never lost sight of the need to build their respective military might. Not surprisingly, all these countries continue to invest heavily on developing and modernizing their military capabilities on land, sea, and air, including developing their own strategic weaponry. What is conspicuously absent, and this, I think, is the area of where we see some anxiety, is the absence in the evolution is a common security architecture. There is no security-oriented intergovernmental organization like the OSCE in Europe, for example. We don't have anything like that in Asia. The closest, perhaps, is to look at the Asian Regional Forum as a possibility. What is also to be noted is that the region has some of the highest military expenditures in the world and continues to be the theaters of military tensions, albeit of a limited scale. Territorial and maritime disputes and trans-border terrorism have the potential to cast a shadow on peace and stability. It is equally important to remember that no less than 3 Asian countries are nuclear armed and possess effective delivery systems. What I've stated above indicate clearly the emergence of a multipolar Asia, spearheaded primarily by China, India, and Japan, not always in that order, with the shadow of the US looming large over it. Well, the canvas is not devoid of tensions emanating from divergences of interest, territorial claims and counterclaims both on land and the seas. It does not reflect the hostility and belligerence that characterize Cold War Europe. Importantly, it is the strength of the growing economies of the major players that have become the primary tool behind the pursuit of increasing their influences in the Asian domain. That, in my view, is a positive that can all use for a common goal of creating a stable, economically and financially sound Asian continent, with its impact on the rest of the world. Importantly, it is a continent that straddles, I'm talking of Asia, that straddles 2 mighty oceans, the Indian and the Pacific, through which passes the bulk of the global trade and energy resources by sea, and over which is located major air corridors. The strategic importance of this massive swathe of land and water, therefore, could not be overemphasized. The Indo-Pacific strategy is but a manifestation of this, albeit with mixed views from key players. Former Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, described this as, quote, the dynamic coupling between the 2 vast oceans as seas of freedom and of prosperity, unquote. It was the coming of the Asian age. Now, how does Bangladesh place itself in the geopolitics of a multipolar Asia? Geographically, Bangladesh sits on the top of the Bay of Bengal and shares its maritime and land boundaries with India and Myanmar. It is effectively the link in the chain that connects South and Southeast Asia. It is this very location that gives Bangladesh its geopolitical relevance. This also poses a challenge for Bangladesh as it strives to position itself in this evolving geopolitical scenario and try to preserve and protect her own national interest while maintaining healthy relationship with key friends in Asia and beyond. This is a challenge that countries like Bangladesh must be ready to face and deal with using tact, craft, and vision. On its part, Bangladesh has much to offer, beginning with the fact that it will soon be graduating to a middle-income nation. It has a huge market. The country has recorded enviable and consistent economic growth in recent times, driven mostly by increasing exports and foreign remittances. Bangladesh has institutionalized the concept of microfinance, which has helped take millions, mostly women, out of abject poverty and has empowered them socially. The middle class is among the largest in the region and growing. The country can rightfully boast of having a secularized society with a sound track record of girls' education and women empowerment. In the area of foreign policy, Bangladesh believes in the concept of using diplomacy as the first line of defense and for resolution of disputes. It has been consistent in pursuing mutually beneficial bilateral, regional, and trans-regional relationships. It has demonstrated its capacity and resolve to deal firmly with extremism and terrorism. Bangladesh has a sizable military that is professional, has developed a global character, and is widely respected for its disaster management capabilities and for keeping peace under the United Nations in far-off lands. More recently, Bangladesh has earned universal accolades for readily providing shelter to more than 1 million Myanmar Rohingya refugees fleeing persecution at home. Bangladesh, therefore, has defied skeptics and has earned recognition as a responsible neighbor and a regional player. It is easy to understand from the above that why analysts tend to believe that offers of economic, technical connectivity and defense cooperation by major countries like India, Japan, and China to countries like Bangladesh as efforts to gain influence in the region. I, for one, do not always view this as a negative. It has its advantages that all can benefit from, especially if one fits Japan into the equation in a major way. This is not an either with me or against me syndrome, far from it. India and China are not just regional powers. They are both matured and responsible players who has clout on the global high table. The handling of the Doklam standoff and the more recent one in Galwan Valley are cases in point where leadership of the two countries have demonstrated their readiness to mutually talk things out without being seen to compromise on their respective territorial claims and strategic interests. Besides, notwithstanding the differences, India and China have convergence on a number of areas. Being players in today's global politics, they know that soft power diplomacy, connectivity, and enhanced economic and military cooperation with smaller countries in the neighborhood, especially Bangladesh, can bring higher political and economic dividends for them than by trying to muscle their way into creating zones of influence, having hostile military alliances, or creating the Cold War era style of client states. India and China and Japan also recognize the smaller countries like Bangladesh today in a position to demonstrate a good measure of autonomy and maneuverability in pursuing their foreign and defense policies that preserve their national political and economic interests while balancing strategic friendships. While initiatives like the BRI and AIIB may have the potential for countries like Bangladesh to plug some of the gaps in infrastructure financing that Bangladesh can accept under repayable terms, the appeal of political and economic proximity to India and the irreversible element of history of the relations is equally obvious, more so in the context of an emerging Indo-Pacific and an Asia-Pacific domain. The same is the case with enhanced defense cooperation, that unlike military alliances of the past, are not aimed against one or the other. Besides, post-Cold War era global geopolitics has a new form. Here, soft but visible diplomacy, extensive connectivity, and enhanced people-to-people contact and economic and defense cooperation has become the major tools for making friends and for deepening those ties. This is no more an ideological war. If there be any competition, it is one for seeking enduring friendships rather than a race for geopolitical dominance. A country like Bangladesh can stand to gain from this if it can focus its diplomatic skills to pursue its strategic goals in a manner that gives confidence to our major Asian and global partners. That our foreign policy recognizes history, seeks strengthening mutually beneficial multifaceted ties, and yet preserve its ability to exercise a good measure of autonomy in making key political and economic policy decisions. And this is what is happening right now. At the same time, Bangladesh would expect her close neighbors and friends in Asia particularly. At the same time, Bangladesh would expect her close neighbors and friends, not just in Asia and beyond, to recognize the Rohingya refugee crisis is not just a bilateral humanitarian one between Bangladesh and Myanmar, but one that can have broader regional ramifications, potentially threatening security and stability, and then they should respond accordingly. It is our expectation that they would use their leverages and play a more proactive role in finding a solution acceptable to all sides and one that ensures the return of these helpless people to their homes in safety and dignity. Myanmar and Afghanistan now have opened up new challenges, and we need to really keep all that in mind and act accordingly. It is in this context of this post-ideological era and economy-driven geopolitics that the perceived race for influence through friendship, connectivity, and cooperation in South Asia and in the Asian theater as a whole needs to be seen and studied. It is a positive that can be nurtured in ways where there are no losers. It is geoeconomics, not just geopolitics, that should govern evolution of a strong, stable Asia-driven world. This is precisely how Bangladesh places itself in a multipolar Asia. It is also true, equally true, the challenges are many and the tasks ahead are formidable. In a scenario where decisions are made by major players with minimal consultation with the smaller ones, a country like Bangladesh is then forced into adopting and reactive responses and adapt and adjust, rather than having a more proactive role. This is an inherent disadvantage for smaller countries in a multipolar dynamic. Notwithstanding the challenges of a country located strategically with its formidable economic progress, commitment to creating a pluralistic society, and an enviable social stability, one that seeks to strike the right balance between geoeconomics and geopolitics, Bangladesh, I believe, is well placed to play its due part in a multipolar Asia and a world that doesn't look too safe. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much for adding additional context about how we are living in the middle of an Asian age, and that to a multipolar Asia, and what the implications of that reality might be for Bangladesh's current and future diplomatic and other areas of exerting influence. Now, the opening two statements have focused largely on Bangladesh in the diplomatic field in terms of geopolitics. I thought, let me switch it up a little. Our third speaker is Dr. Fahmida Khatun, who's the executive director of CPD. And Dr. Fahmida, if you could perhaps address the issue of Bangladesh as an economy and how the economy has been growing over the years and where you see things going over the next few decades of our the next few decades, and how Bangladesh can exert its influence in the economic sphere and is doing so perhaps already. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Zafar. Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. On the occasion of Bangladesh's 50th anniversary of independence, and also on the eve of the Victory Day, I would like to congratulate and wish you. And again, thanks to also the Norwegian Embassy for organizing and joining hands with Dhaka Tribune in organizing this very important and very pertinent topic for discussion. So the two previous speakers, as Zafar has mentioned, provided insights on mainly on political international relations and strategic issues. So as you have requested, I would like to focus on the economic aspects also. So my conversation would be focused on three areas. Of course, the basically the first one is success or the experience of Bangladesh's journey during the last 5 decades, and where are we now at this moment, and how to, what is our future in terms of not only becoming a regional and global player, but also for ourselves, what do we foresee, where do we want to be. So in fact, the current strength of the economy would also determine where we would be. If we look at Bangladesh's 50 years of economic journey, then one would really also wonder how do we come here? Because after the liberation war, Bangladesh has inherited an economy which was undiversified. It was a war-torn economy with very little resources, and with very very little. The size of the economy was very small, and also the population size was very high. As you remember, the famous, the economist, they have made a comment that if development is possible in Bangladesh, it would be possible in any other country, because the extent of poverty and the size of the population was so much that it was really difficult to dream for a country where we are right now. So from that, and now we are recognized as a lower middle income country. In 2015, World Bank has, in the World Bank's category, we have moved from a low income country to a lower middle income country, and we are foreseeing, we aspire to become an upper middle income country by 2031, an advanced economy by 2041. And meanwhile, also we have qualified for graduation from a least developed country to a developing country by 2026 by fulfilling all three criteria which are required to graduate, that is the per capita income, human asset index, and economic vulnerability index. So Bangladesh is one of the rare countries which have fulfilled all three criteria at a time. So, and this has also been possible to come this far is because of the various macroeconomic policies. Some sort of policy stability has been there. There has been regime changes, of course, but for a longer period of time, basically the economic policies were in the same line, I would say. And also, as a result of all these achievements, the size of the economy has increased. Now we are an economy of $409 billion. And as a result of the size of the GDP, the per capita income has increased also over $2,000, which was low, below $200 at the time of our independence. So as a result of economic progress, there has been social progress also. And we have performed so well in case of the Millennium Development Goals and also in case of the Sustainable Development Goals. In fact, Bangladesh has been a stellar performer, surpassing many similar countries, not only the African countries, but also the South Asian countries. And in the recent past, the achievement has been recognized by the United Nations. Also, our Prime Minister has been awarded for this performance in case of SDG achievement. So, and in case of social progress, Bangladesh's social progress in case of women's empowerment that has been mentioned by Ambassador Shamsher Chowdhury. In fact, the social development model that Bangladesh has prepared or achieved is an example across the world, not only in case of women's empowerment through microcredit, but also the delivery of social services, healthcare, education through our NGOs, non-government organizations. For example, BRAC, which is the largest NGO in the world, that has also provided a model through which one can also, parallelly alongside the government, the organizations can deliver various services and reach out to the people who are marginalized, who are left behind. So these are some of the examples which are emulated in many countries. As you know that BRAC offices and many other offices are in many other countries. So the other area is that the issue of climate change. Bangladesh is a vulnerable country because of the impact of climate change. It is at the recipient end, though we are not a polluter. But on the other hand, we are also a resilient country in the sense that we have been facing the impact of climate change in terms of floods and natural disasters, cyclone, almost every year. But we see that how we have become resilient and we can withstand those natural disasters. You look at any advanced countries in the US also, any small natural disaster, how messy their management can become, whereas this is a regular phenomenon in Bangladesh. And over the years, we have been able to develop a model of adaptation also. that the impact or the negative impact of climate change can be withstood by the people through local solutions, because it is a reality now and we can't do anything about it. So our strategy is to adapt to the impact and so that we can reduce to the impact of the climate change. And these adaptation models now are being replicated in many African countries. So we have also provided knowledge. This knowledge is invaluable, in fact. It is not available in the developed countries, but this is a homegrown model. So that's another example. And also not only in the domestic area, but also at the global level, Bangladesh is raising its voice in terms of urging the countries to work together towards mitigating and adapting to the impact of climate change. Our Prime Minister is the president of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, and as a president of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, her voice is really strong at the international level. We have seen just concluded during the just concluded COP26 meeting in Glasgow, how she has been acclaimed by the global leaders. So this is another area where we have been playing our role, and this role is being also followed by many other countries. So now coming back to the economic area, so we are into the COVID situation right now. So during COVID also, we have seen that countries across the world, be it a developed country or developing country, everyone has been facing the wrath of the COVID-19, and it has been reflected in their economic performance. Many countries could not make any progress in terms of GDP. Their growth has been zero, negative, 1%. Even the large countries like China, they also had a very low GDP growth. Bangladesh's growth has been, international organizations had a lower projection, but the government has an estimate of 5.2% in 2020. So, which is actually it's exceptionally high, exceptionally good, I would say. So even if it is 3 to 4%, that is also very very good performance. Why that has been possible? Three areas. We have seen that during COVID, agriculture has remained resilient and it continued to provide food supplies. Remittances had been very high. Remittance flow had been exceptionally high, which had also protected the people who are poor, who are dependent on remittances. The other area is, of course, exports. For a period of time, export orders had declined, but we had again bounced back. So this performance has given, it is because there is a steady footing. And as a result of that, many countries, we are not only a recipient of support, but we are also supporting other countries. With regard to support, when Bangladesh was just liberated, that time we were dependent on foreign aid at a large extent. At this moment in time, our dependence on foreign aid is only 2% of GDP. And now, as you remember, that Bangladesh has provided $150 million to Sri Lanka. Now Maldives is asking for support. So, which again shows that the confidence the country has received within the region within South Asia. And its strategic importance has been mentioned, but economically, as a member of BIMSTEC, as a member of BBIN or BCIM, I wouldn't talk about SARC, but all these regional blocks are very important, and Bangladesh is a very important player. In case of global role, globally also how Bangladesh is playing an important role. We are the second largest supplier of ready-made garments to the world after China, and this has been retained for, since the middle or early 90s. There had been ups and downs, there had been challenges, but the private sector, Bangladeshi entrepreneurs have been able to withstand those. For example, of course, the initial boost or initial incentive was the MFA multi-fiber arrangement, which provided duty-free access to the global market. Bangladeshi private sector had taken the advantage of that. That was given to all other LDCs. But look at the other LDCs, what they have done. So our entrepreneurs could take advantage, full advantage of that, and could increase the export of ready-made garments. And there was also apprehension when the MFA was withdrawn that what will happen to this export sector, ready-made garments export sector. Our ready-made garment sector did not decline, so we could withstand. Then again, now there is discussion that after LDC graduation, there will be challenges because we will lose the duty-free, quota-free market access. But if the past experience says something, then I think I'm hopeful that Bangladesh's entrepreneurs will also be able to withstand. However, this time it will be not so easy because many things is happening at a time. At this point in time, Bangladesh gets duty-free access to the European market under the EBA, everything but arms facility, and many other countries, North American countries, Australia, Japan, even in China, and also India. So this has provided a preference for Bangladesh, huge preference. So once this facility is withdrawn, Bangladesh's exports will have to enter to the markets paying the existing duty, which ranges from 10% to 15%. So which will definitely increase the cost, export cost. So that will require our preparation and also strategic. Strategies in terms of how to increase the productivity, in terms of how to increase the skills of workers, and also this time the EBA, which is going to be renewed for another 10 years from 2024 to 2034. So that will include, that already includes, those who have seen that, there are so many compliance-related issues which we have to comply with. These are not only related to the traditional labor rights issues, but also new issues. Environment and compliance will become so critical. And for that, we have to prepare. So I'll come to the preparation part later, but the other aspect also is that the potential for Bangladesh is that energy cooperation. Bangladesh could become another partner for energy cooperation, energy exchange, because after meeting our domestic demand, we can very well export energy to the neighboring countries. The other issue is the human resource. Though we have a small economy, but as Zafar has mentioned, we have 170 million people, and we have the advantage of a young nation. Our population, most of the people are young, so we have the demographic dividend. Taking advantage of that, we can prosper, we can do we can benefit, or we can reap economic benefits. If you look at the Western countries, the advanced countries, they have aging populations. So if we can train and scale our human resources, we can provide, then we can supply the caregivers, which is at the moment Philippines, Sri Lanka. They are taking this, they are taking part in this. So we are still way behind. So that is another area of future potential. I wouldn't. Another issue is the issue of coming to the global aspects. So Ambassador Farooq Sobhan has touched upon a few issues. I would little bit also touch upon that Bangladesh is going forward. So Bangladesh is, in order to reap from the regional trading blocks, and also in order to benefit from the trade, we also have to take part in the other forms of trading blocks, because as you know that the World Trade Organization, which is the multilateral trading system, this is now almost defunct organization. After 2002, we have not seen any progress. So World Trade Organization, which is an organization which facilitates trade among countries by liberalizing trade, by reducing tariff, nothing is moving. So as a result of that, countries are now doing, moving towards plurilateralism, and also they are going into free trade agreements, comprehensive economic partnership. We have seen that regional comprehensive partnership, RCEP, or RCEPA, or RCEPA. So that has come out. We have also, seen earlier that TPP, which is still, which is not yet signed, but anytime it can also progress. So these international trading blocs have significance, tremendous significance for Bangladesh. If you look at that, Bangladesh is not part of that, and also Bangladesh has not been invited to join. But you also see that in the RCEP, Cambodia and Laos PDR, they are part of that, and they are least developed countries. Now, when Bangladesh will graduate, Bangladesh will lose the duty-free, quota-free access, the preferential access, whereas these countries, even after they graduate, they will continue to benefit the preferential access, from the preferential access, because of their partnership with this, or because of their association with these trade agreements. So our effort now will have to be, put our full effort to become members of such, big trade blocks. But for that, we also need to prepare ourselves. This requires, because nowadays this trade blocks are not only trade blocks. It is a comprehensive economic partnership. It contains trade. It is about investment. It is about connectivity. It is about services sector. It is about trade, intellectual property rights. So we really have to prepare for that. We have to reform our measures, regulatory measures, wherever it is needed. We also have to, improve our skills, because if you talk about investment, where would the investment go? Investment goes where the political stability is there, infrastructure, good infrastructure, and also where there is good human resource skills. So I think we have to do a lot on these front if we really want to invite or attract foreign investment. And in terms of also trading, expanding our trade, we have taken advantage of the, a competitive, providing a competitive price in the ready-made garments. But as you know that because of, once we are in a higher league, in the developing country league, then many things will have also changed. So the issue of decent work, issue of higher wages, these will be more important. But at the same time, we also have to be competitive. So we have to be, unless we can improve our productivity, we can't remain competitive. We can't provide higher salary to the workers. We can't give them a decent work. So our strategy should be, two-pronged. At the same time, on the one hand, we have to increase our skills and productivity. On the other hand, we also have to ensure decent lives for the people who are working for the sector. So I think I should end now. Moving forward, nowadays, the problems or challenges are interlinked. They are cross-cutting and cross-border in nature. So you cannot solve one problem in isolation, and you cannot also solve your own challenge without involving other countries. So it is not only that climate change is a global problem, but also, as I have described, that trade and investment and other issues are also so much interlinked with other countries. We are living in an interconnected world, integrated world. So that's why we have to prepare in such a way that we not only we look at our own problems, but also we are mindful of the other countries' issues, and we prepare ourselves in that line. With this, I would like to end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fahmida. That was an excellent blueprint, economically speaking, of how Bangladesh can actually move forward. And as you have mentioned, when we talk about the population back in 1971, of course, people looked at the vast population of Bangladesh and it as being an impoverished country and thought that that would be a great challenge. Fast forward today, 50 years later, as we are graduating from our LDC status, then all of a sudden our large population becomes an asset. You mentioned that the demographic dividend, because of so many of the large population are young, and we have a massive domestic market and we have a huge pool of workers which can help propel our economic growth. You've mentioned the RMG industry. You've mentioned how we need to also, when it comes to manpower export, really move up the food chain, so to speak, into services which are more value added, as well as I think that goes for the RMG industry, which is moving more towards knitwear, for instance, and other areas which are more profitable than what they had been the case over the past few decades. I want to now bring the discussion in. We have Kazi Nabil Ahmed MP, who is a member of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And Nabil, if you could speak a little bit about, from a governmental point of view, Bangladesh being a good global citizen on issues such as climate change, issues such as migration, and how Bangladesh is really projecting itself on the global stage over the last few years, and how you see that panning out in the coming years or decades. Over to you, Nabil.
Thank you very much, Zafar, for giving me the floor. I would like to thank the Royal Norwegian Embassy for helping Dhaka Tribune to organize this very topical issue. And I would like to thank all the panelists for attending, and all the distinguished members of audiences, Your Excellency the ambassadors present, Honorable Member of Parliament, and academics and other friends from journalists. I would like to start my speech by paying homage to Father of the Nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, without whom Bangladesh would not have happened. This is a very special year now, 2021. We are observing the 100 years of the Father of the Nation's birth centenary. At the same time, we are also celebrating right now the 50th year of Bangladesh's independence and Victory Day, which is tomorrow. So we're at the cusp of our Victory Day tomorrow in less than 24 hours. Bangladesh turns 50 when Bangladesh became fully free and independent. I would like to rewind back to 1971, where we were in 1971. 1971, we all know the Father of the Nation's speech in 1971, 7th March. He spoke of Shat Koti Manush, basically Share Shat Koti Manush, 70 million people, 75 million people. And right now we're 170 million people. At that time, the index showed that approximately 87% of Bangladeshis lived below the absolute poverty line. And if we still see photos from then, there's an exhibition going on right now by Samdani Art Foundation of the photos of 1971. If we go see those photos, you'll see a lot of people there without any clothes on their back, basically, in those photos. I would also like to remind everyone, after Bangladesh became independent, with 3 million martyrs and 250,000 women who gave their honor, I would like to say, at that point, the very outset, the US Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, said, Bangladesh is a bottomless basket. Pretty much whatever you put in it is going to fall from underneath. And I do remember growing up in the 70s and 80s. In 70s, reading that Bangladesh's per capita income at that point was $120. I remember very well being a teenager in the 80s. The Bangladesh's per capita income was approximately $200 something at that point throughout the decade. A lot of numbers have been said. Our distinguished panelists, the former two foreign secretaries and executive director of CPD, have outlaid the whole geopolitical scheme where we are and all the economic data. So I will not going to restate those things. I had some of those points, but not going to restate those things. Where are we today? We are today 50 years old. And where are we going from here? There's 80 years in front of us in this 21st century. If we look at last century, there were two upheavals, First World War and Second World War. First World War got rid of three big empires, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, German, and Second World War divided the whole world in two different camps. This whole decade, this whole century that we have in front of us, if somebody looks back at 2071, 2081, 2091, how are they going to think what were we thinking in 2021? Whatever we do now is going to set the stage for our children and grandchildren's generation who are going to come after us. I would like to say we are at this stage at a juncture where Bangladesh is one of the most interesting countries in the world. And we do see from economic point of view all the information that has been stated. Right now, last year, 2020, our GDP was $324 billion. HSBC Bank has estimated that by 2030, our GDP is going to be like $700 billion. Bangladesh right now is the 42nd largest economy in the world. And by 2030, we are supposed to be the 26th largest economy in the world, which is a 16-stage jump. No other country in the next 8 years is projected to make that jump. This jump and this information that I'm giving you, right now if we see, like over 98% of the children are enrolled in high schools. Inoculation is done like 98%. Electrification has been done in the country by 2020 like 99, 100%. Even right now, all the chores are being brought under electrification. If you look at all the other infrastructure issues, in 2009, when Sheikh Hasina-led government, Awami League, took over, our power generation was approximately 3,000 megawatt. Right now, our total capacity is 25,000 megawatt, and we are generating approximately 14,000 to 15,000 megawatt. All the economic data that we are providing of our export of over $40 billion of our foreign currency reserve, over $45 billion. All these things are not happening in isolations. The government is working, the private sector is working, the development sector are working, the people are working. I really do think in the 1970s and 80s, when Bangladesh was referred very colloquially as a basket case, those days are long gone. Right now, Bangladesh is projected as a role model of development economy throughout the world. And under Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's leadership, we have seen in the last 13 years what development really means, how to get this to the doorsteps of the people of Bangladesh. All the different social safety schemes that have been taken, from VGF card to all the different stipends, from poor stipend to every other stipend that has been taken, has given some safety net to all the rural people who have not seen the full modernization of the economy yet. And I do think that safety net needs to be increased, and every year it is being done so. But Bangladesh has two main tricks that we have right now. We have the ready-made garments industry, and we have our foreign workers. These two things are providing us huge two pillars. But if we are depending on these two things, I would like to say right now, Bangladesh's economy is also diversifying at a very fast pace. We can see all the light manufacturing that is getting priced out of China right now are heading to two different countries. One is Vietnam, one is Bangladesh. And this is being done because of the rule of law, because of the business indexes, because of the education, because electrification, infrastructure, connectivity, all these things. Of course, there's a lot more room for improvement in all of these issues. But those things are happening and they're existing. That's why all these businesses are coming into Bangladesh right now. And going forward, what we do say is that we don't have any natural resources. But our biggest natural resource is our people, and very enterprising people. Right now, almost in the furthest corners of the world, wherever we go, we're going to find Bangladeshis there, either starting out as a taxi driver, or as a shopkeeper, or as a vendor, or as a restaurant worker, or in some other service industry. But very soon, the children, as we see, second generation in UK, USA, and parts of Europe, are moving into law, accountancy, business, and even public representation. Many people are getting elected to many different local councils that we're seeing in the newspapers every day. I would like to say the best asset of Bangladesh and the best selling point of Bangladesh and the best ambassadors of Bangladesh are its people, in my view. I would like to think that going forward, Bangladesh is going to get stronger. Where we are right now as the largest provider of UN peacekeeping forces, where Bangladesh is trusted around the world for doing a job well. I would also like to think that Bangladesh can go ahead, not only as a stabilizing power in South Asia, where we have two nuclear-powered countries over here, and we have very strong neighbors to our left and to our north, as in India and China. And I do realize the last century was a rivalry between US and USSR. This century is already shaping up to be an Asian century, as that has been stated already. And there is an issue of rivalry of US and China, or China and India. Bangladesh has to be something of a sweetener between all of these. We must have relationships strong with USA, with EU, with China, with India, with all our neighbors. Going forward, we must be able to be peacemakers as well. Our Prime Minister has already spoken on this issue multiple times regarding India and Pakistan and the nuclear power that has emerged in the region. I do think going forward, we can work together. One of the biggest assets of Bangladesh is the development that is being done, and I do think that's getting stronger every day. And politically, we must be aware that going forward, no country is going to be giving us a free lunch, but Bangladeshis are the enterprising people who are working at home, working abroad to make our economy stronger, our brand stronger, and our position stronger throughout the world. I do think at 2021, if somebody is brought from 1971, all the martyrs who gave their present for our tomorrows, if they came, they would really think that something has been done. But I do still believe a lot more needs to be done, and a lot more will be done by the people of Bangladesh. I do think the best days of Bangladesh are still ahead of us. Thank you very much. I wish you the very best. Joy Bangla, Joy Bangabandhu.
Thank you very much, Nabil. I think centering the Bangladeshi people, as you did in your address, is absolutely the right way to go. And whether it be the work which we do in development in countries in Afghanistan or places like Liberia and Uganda and Africa, or whether it be the taxi driver or the construction worker in the Middle East or in a country such as Malaysia or Singapore, I think you're absolutely right that Bangladeshis give a very good account of themselves wherever they go. And of course, we're seeing the second and third generations now getting educated, prospering. And of course, if you look at what's happening here inside the country over the last 50 years, I absolutely agree that we've come a great distance. And of course, as you say, hopefully, the best is yet to come. We have with us the editor of Prothomalo English, Ms. Ayesha Kabir. Ayesha, if you could say a few words on this issue.
Thank you, Zafar. Assalamu alaikum and good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of this event, mostly because of the time that they have chosen, the eve of our Victory Day. Bangladesh as current and future regional global players. I'd like to add another word to that. Bangladesh as past, current, and future regional players. Why I say past? Because it all started in 1971. So this is a particular significant time that you've chosen this topic. Because in 1971, we were a strong global player in the sense that some of the most powerful forces, global powers, superpowers, were against our liberation, were against our independence war. But we stood up against them. Despite that, we did have help from friends, we did have support. But the two major powers which were against us proved to be ineffective against our power that time as a global player. And what was our strength at that time? The strength was our people, the unity among our people. So today, in particular, I think that when we talk about being a current and a global, current and future global player, I think that is the strength that we need, the unity, whether whatever political differences, whatever differences we have among us, what is most important is for us to stand together, united, to face the rest of the world as a global, as a regional player. So as I start my discussion, I'd like to concentrate more on our soft power, because we've spoken about strategy, we've spoken about economics and so many things, but I think there's a lot to be said about our soft power, things which are there, things in which we're very strong about, but which perhaps we don't express so openly. What is the main focus in recent times, regionally speaking, has been Afghanistan, with the new government in power there, or the new takeover over there. There's been a rush towards Afghanistan by powers from all over the world, pouring in investment, pouring in different sort of strengths or powers, everyone wanting to have a say over there. What about Bangladesh? We're not going to have huge investments like other countries. We don't have that sort of strategic clout or interest in that strategic clout in Afghanistan. But I have to say something very positive about Bangladesh in this sense, because there has been a negative view that, oh, Bangladesh youth, some extremists are wanting to, rush there as mujahideen as they did in the past and all. But no, that's such a negligible, such a cliched sort of thought. What has been our strength there, if we see, Fahmida mentioned BRAC. BRAC has been working in Afghanistan for a long time, and they've been working so well over there, so excellently, performing so well. The people in Afghanistan, in the rural Afghanistan, the poor people, they really, really took to BRAC. You would imagine that they might have been, anti-NGOs or thinking, because of maybe their religious extremism and all. But no, BRAC was a very strong force over there. So I think Bangladesh can think in those terms when we're thinking about regional interactions. Our example of BRAC in Afghanistan is a huge, huge example that we can think of. And speaking about BRAC, another thing, our strength has been our NGO sector, which has worked in collaboration with the government. And a lot of our models, whether it's microcredit, health, are being replicated all over the world, even in America. So I think that's another aspect we can work on, we can develop more. And then we go to another huge example, I think, of our soft power is our disaster management. Every year, year in and year out, we are hit by disasters. And if, again, we go back to the early 70s, we can remember what a terrible cyclone hit us then in November 1970, and what devastation we saw at that time. But we've come a long way since. We're still hit by terrible and increasingly strong, increasing in number too, cyclones, typhoons every year. But our fatalities, our casualties are so much less than before, and we're learning to live with that. We're learning to take that into our control. And we even remember when Cyclone Katrina hit America, there was talk in the US administration about Bangladesh being a role model. So disaster management is another thing which we can strengthen and also, export as a in part of our global interactions. Then another huge institution I'd like to mention here is ICDDRB. Why I'm mentioning that? Because we've been receiving awards for ICDDRB and their researchers in recent years. And I think they've made a huge, huge breakthrough in various contagious diseases, and whether it's diarrhea through their oral saline and all. That's another huge role model, and it's become actually an internationally recognized research institute. So if we can develop that, develop more research in those areas, I think that's another area where Bangladesh is recognized and can be further recognized, especially in these days with the outbreak of the pandemic, and we know that there could be future contagions in the coming days. I think such organizations, such institutions are another area where we can focus on. We already have our example role model in immunization, our immunization programs, especially regionally speaking. We have eradicated polio, we've eradicated diphtheria and other diseases which unfortunately many of our South Asian neighbors are still suffering from. So that's another area where, especially regionally and globally, we can display our strength, help others, and also strengthen ourselves further. Another, I think, extremely pertinent area is our area of counterterrorism, because terrorism, militancy is a huge, is in focus globally, regionally today. And I think this is one area where Bangladesh has really showed its strength, especially after the unfortunate incident of the militancy in the Gulshan Cafe. After that, we've seen our security forces have really clamped down on that, and there haven't been any significant incidents after that. Not only that, from before that, we've also, regionally speaking, we've uprooted insurgents of our neighboring country who were perhaps said to be trained or have camps within our country. We've very effectively even eliminated that. So I think as a regional player, in that sense, our counter-terrorism, counter-militancy is another area we can be proud of. Already the UN peacekeeping has been mentioned. And then I want to mention now another area where we can be global and regional players is our women power, our strength, our women's strength. Yes, we still have a long way to go for women's development, but we've also come a long, long way. Whether it's right from the top of our government, whether it's in our parliament, whether it's in our academia, our research, whether it's in our industries, our workers, women are showing their strength, their clout everywhere. And this can be developed much further. And I think in South Asia and region and in the world, our women are becoming more and more visible, whether it's even in our peacekeeping forces, whether it's at home in our police and our army, and in all sectors. So that's another area where we can think about in our global and regional interactions. And I've already mentioned, I think, our NGO sector, that's doing well. And then Fahmida, I think, also mentioned, and also Nabil mentioned our youth demographic. We always talk about youth being the future, but they're not just the future, they're very much the present, because if we see nowadays, younger and younger people are having more say. They're planners even, or they're players now, and they're getting younger, whether it's in technology, in politics, in culture, academia, and in all sorts of sectors. Our youth are coming forward, and if we go around the world, as Nabil was saying, that you go, wherever you go in the world, there's people, and not just workers, not just entrepreneurs, but the youth are really shining abroad, whether it's in research, whether it's in technology. So I think it's time for the youth at home. They've got so much potential, so there's a big demand for them to be upskilled further, educated further, and be prepared as future leaders of the world, future players. And so when I think it was Ambassador Sobhan was saying that about players, that it's not just, shouldn't be just players because it's not just about sports and all, but I have to say in sports too, think of our girls. Our boys might not have been doing good in cricket, but even in cricket, our girls have been showing their clout, or our youth, our under 19. So even in the literal sense, our players are also a strength to be reckoned with. And so I think right now, what I think we should focus on is upskilling, research, and strengthening these soft powers. That these soft powers can be very hard powers in that sense, that can make a difference globally and regionally. So I think that's all I have to say today.
Well, no, that's very eloquent, Ayesha. And I have to say, when we were discussing the subject matter, we did have a little bit of an internal debate as to whether it should be regional and global player or regional and global power. We went for player because we thought that that was a little bit sort of more inclusive. But of course, using your definition of soft power, maybe we could have changed the terminology, because I think you've done a really great job of showing just where it is that Bangladesh excels both domestically and what we can actually export to the rest of the world. And, you know, as you mentioned, places as the NGO sector, which leads the world, of course, but, you know, we don't think in terms, and I think Dr. Fahmida mentioned this as well, you know, disaster management, public health, counterterrorism. I mean, these are also areas in which the rest of the world, and specifically the region, can take a leaf out of Bangladesh's book very profitably. Our final panelist is Shafiqul, who's the AFP Bureau Chief here in Bangladesh. And as the AFP Bureau Chief, Shafiq, you often, you know, you are one of the first interlocutors of Bangladesh for the international media and the international world. And so, based on that experience of yours, you've been doing this job, I think, at least about 10 years now, if I'm not wrong. How do you see Bangladesh's role in the world, and how do you see how the world views Bangladesh has been changing, you know, over the last decade, and perhaps how things may change in the coming decade? Over to you, Shafiq Bhai.
Actually, I'll be talking more as a someone who visit Bangladeshi countryside almost every month, and I write about 2 diaries, one about Dhaka and another about village. And this, whatever I'm saying today, it doesn't reflect my employer's opinion. So what so, sorry, okay. I think like when you think about becoming a regional or current player, there's the tough question. I think nobody is asking the tough questions. Here, we are talking about geographic advantages. We are talking about grand game like Afghanistan, what's happening in Afghanistan, or the end of the war of terror, or something like the new polar world of US versus China, or our economic strength. But the tough question is, can we become a regional player with a broken education system, with a justice which poor cannot access, with a justice system which is where minority issues still haven't decided yet. He still haven't answer yet. In my places, I can see, I came from a place where Hindus still make up 30% of the population. They waited 40 years until this Sheikh Hasina government came. They waited 40 years to build a new home because they are not sure whether they are going to stay here. So these are the questions. And the justice system, whatever sanctions we witness over the last few days, it's because of our broken justice system. We thought we have devised a quick fix to our justice system, and that's RAB. I don't know, maybe there are extrajudicial killings all over the world, but thing is, it's a reflection of our justice system because we want to pass some quick justice. Then education system, have you seen how many madrasas have been set up over the last 20, 30 years? 20, 30,000. So people no longer, my cousin, my distance cousin, I can tell you about like dozens of cases. They no longer want their kids to go to the schools because schools have become over expensive. They don't send their students because they are sending their kids. It's not about the reflection that our society has become radicalized. It's the reflection because whatever, like we have set up a education system in which girls were meant to get a free education. But do you know how much a class 9 student, a girl student, pay to buy a guidebook? For a science guidebook, she has to pay at least 4,000 taka. Her father can afford, and he pull it out. I call it a Panjari effect. Panjari and some other guidebooks, and please, I don't want to get a defamation case here. These guys just buy Bangladeshi head teachers. Bangladeshi head teachers, and these head teachers make girls to buy guidebooks because they get bribes. And as a result, what's happening? What's happening? Because by the time they reach class 9, 50–60% of the girls, they just left. They are married off. So if you want to be a, like we are talking about becoming a regional player, we have to address these kind of things, like yes. And whatever economic achievement we have, it is because of just one thing, cheap. We are still selling cheap labor at home. We are still selling cheap labor in the Middle East. People are recruiting us because they know Bangladeshi worker can be recruited at $300, $400, $500. Far better, like a far more competitive rate than Pakistanis or Indians or even some case Nepalis. And at home we are like becoming, we have a $40 billion garment exports because if you see the products, these are all narrow products. We are doing T-shirts, we are doing shirts and pants. These are the products that China no longer wants to do. So we have emerged not because of our economic graduation, like all the South Korea, Taiwan, or other economies, they have graduated into some is a major economy because they fixed their education system, because they graduated from a very low-cost manufacturing economy to a service economy. We haven't. That's why some of them are in Taiwan, despite being a 20 million people nation, they can push back China. They can call themselves a big partner of US because of their economic strength. I think these are the I think the 4–5 things we still haven't settled yet. One is justice system. We still throughout the 1970s, our total crime murders every year was about 1,500 to 2,000. If you see the statistics, it remained almost between 1,700 and 2,200. All of these police statistics. And now we have 4,000 murders a year, every year. And what happened? And in the 1970s, our police strength was 25,000. And now we have around 250,000 police. We almost if you go to walk into a rural police station, you will see some of them don't have any work. And still we haven't fixed our justice system. Our lower court, I don't know. If you see and you could say, whatever case they came up, they all have women and child repression case. So I came from a place, I came from a village, and I know each and every one of my 4,000 people who are there. I am a big, I'm a partner in there. I can see that my brothers, some of them live abroad, they send me money, I become part of them. And as a result, I can see their stories. Someone who has a major disease, he just falls back into poverty. Just within one disease can just destroy the whole family. We don't have a social safety net to protect them. I think these are the questions. If you want to be a big regional player, we need to have a first-class education system. We need to nationalize whatever schools are there. Nobody, no one, not even madrasas, they can impart any education without the government has to nationalize each and every job until the 12th degree, I think. That's why we can ensure some sort of like a quality education in the schools. And I don't see it anywhere. If you go to like in my village, if you go to the main school, the class 9, I think now has 97 students. It's like a bazaar. You cannot impart any education. And in the 70s, 80s, everywhere, every year, 1 or 2 students would come to the city and study in a private, in a elite state-run university. They got admission there. But nowadays, they can't. If someone has money or if someone has a father living in Middle East, they would send money back, and they can send their kids to a private university. But overall, I think that our education system cannot cannot create a generation which can dominate the regional economies. It can be another Taiwan or a South Korea. I think these are the questions. And also the way we are polluting our rivers, the way we are polluting everything. Plastic is a big menace. We are a vulnerable country. It's like 170 million people live in a very small place. And that way, can we afford to have like plant polluting everywhere, every bazaar? If you go every bazaar, it's a bhagar is everywhere. There is a waste dumping and nobody is clearing it. Everywhere. And we are not like USA. We are not like big nation like Russia that wherever if you fail, if there are litters, nobody even bother to see. If you dump a simple like waste, you can see it. It's a very small nation. And then like in 1960s, in 1990s, I think we used to see Buriganga like a pollution the Buriganga only in the March and April, because at this before the new monsoon comes. But now Buriganga is polluted right from September, and other rivers, all the I think now 40 or 50 rivers is now polluted, and sooner or later we will have like 90 or 100, or maybe we will have a 1 trillion cleanup job coming up for the next governments. I don't know whoever. So these are the some of the questions. We want to be a major regional player, but unless we solve our education, unless we have a proper justice, the idea of justice is still idle. We solve the question of our minority, not minority being only the minority of Hindus or Christians or religious men. There are a lot of minorities. It's a new identity politics. There are all the LGBTQs are the minorities. There are minorities like the Biharis are minorities. These are I don't think what I see, my 30 years of traveling my village, I can see that 2 Bangladesh have growing up parallelly. One is Bangladesh, and this chasm is becoming bigger and bigger. We who are living in Dhaka, slowly we are acting and living like global New Yorker. People who live in the New York, we are behaving like them, and that the rest of the people, they have it separate them, they have a separate thing, and they know how to solve. If they want justice, they know how to bribe people, or if they want to say their idea of justice, idea of jobs, these are all separate. I think these are the things that we need to solve before we dream of becoming a major regional players.
Thank you very much, Shafiq. I know you raise very good points. You give us all food for thought when it comes to education, justice, pollution. All of these issues are problems which we definitely need to solve, and perhaps much of what we have achieved, you could say, in terms of has been sort of despite the education which is on offer rather than because of it. I think this is something Dr. Fahmida had also mentioned, where she said we really need to upskill ourselves if we're going to make waves and really establish ourselves on the regional or global stage in an economic sense. And certainly it's true when you talk about the garment garment industry, if you talk about migrant workers, we also need to be moving up the value chain. There's no doubt about that. I would like, we've run a little bit longer, but if people would give us this indulgence, I'm enjoying this conversation a lot. And we do have a very eminent audience. And I would like to open it up briefly to comments from audience members. So if you could sort of raise your hands and we'll send a microphone around. Please keep your comments very, very limited, just a couple of minutes. Introduce yourself when you speak. I know all of you, but maybe there are other people here who do not. Okay, so if we could, and we can maybe do that for 20 or 30 minutes, and then we'll bring it back for final, very brief final comments, and then we'll break for lunch, if that works for everyone. Okay, super.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to any one of the speakers. We've heard about the great development success story of Bangladesh, but also a number of challenges have been mentioned. If you were to pick 3 major challenges facing Bangladesh going forward, particularly in this pandemic era of climate emergency or climate crisis, as well as this era of Cold War 2.0, what are those 3 major challenges that you see facing Bangladesh, and how can we properly address them? Thank you.
Guests, I am Hassan Masood, former correspondent of Daily Star and Bangladesh correspondent of BBC World Service. I totally agree with my younger brother Shafiq, the bureau chief of AFP, Bangladesh, that we need to actually address whatever the points he raised, especially the judiciary system, the education system and pollution, all these things. And what I want to specifically say that is, just I want to go back to 1972, and I want to see what was the ratio of ringgit and taka. So ringgit was inferior than taka in 1972, and in the late 70s and early 80s, I have seen many Malaysian students are coming to Bangladesh and studying in different institutions, including Dhaka University, Dhaka Medical College, Khulna Medical College, and other places. Now the whole system has changed. Now a ringgit cost 21 to 22 taka. So until and unless we try and solve this gap, I mean close this gap, our economy will never rise. Whatever you have said, all are statistics. And the statistics are very big lies, you know. So what I want to say is that we need to actually points on these issues, whatever Shafiq has mentioned, and whatever I am mentioning, that we have to close the gap between this difference between Malaysia and Bangladesh. Where Malaysia was and where Malaysia is now, and where we were and where we are now. So if we do not, until and unless these problems are being solved, we cannot go further. We may improve in NGO sectors, we may improve in many other sectors, many things, but these things are major issues, major points, and we have to solve these problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have Lelufa Yasmin, who's just sitting in the middle at the back there.
Thank you, distinguished panelists and Norwegian Embassy for arranging this very topical issue. I've been listening to all the domestic ingredients of national power for Bangladesh, and we can see a very positive future. We have a lot of challenges. But what I would like to point out is what is the strategic value and strategic depth that Bangladesh has achieved in last 50 years that is yet to be addressed. Look at during the pandemic how Bangladesh has shown its foreign policy assertiveness by saying America no we are not going to join the Quad or IPS. Similarly, asking China to stay away from Bangladesh's internal choices, as well as saying to UK that no, we are not going to take Shamima Begum back to Bangladesh because she's not our citizen. So Bangladesh has achieved a unique strategic value, a unique strategic depth. That is something we are not paying attention to. And this assertiveness must come from Bangladesh. Domestically, we have a lot of areas where we are developing. We have challenges we are yet to address, but its strategic value and strategic depth remains out of focus. That is where I would urge Bangladeshi scholars to work and promote. I know there's a Bengali saying, "Apunake bodo bole je bodo shei noy, loke jake bodo bole bodo shei hoy." That is like modesty is a innate Bengali sort of nature. But it is time that we also start showing that there is the rise of assertive Bangladesh around the world, regionally, as well as globally. And at the same time, I'll just finish by saying that its locational reality, linchpin position at the mouth of the Bay of Bengal, that is something has given it a bargaining power vis-a-vis both India and China. We not always we need to go to them. They also need to come to us because they need access to Bay of Bengal. They need Bangladesh as their partners. These are some of the issues I think always left outside of the discussion. So when we're talking about current and future regional and global player, these are the issues I would request that we start talking more about more. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I was quite overwhelmed listening to what all of you are mentioning and also establishing. I want to begin by paying my very deep tribute to Norwegian Embassy and Dhaka Tribune and all the distinguished speakers. I just want to mention in 1980-81, Norwegian Embassy had its main office in Delhi, and the ambassador was the great-grandson of Henrik Ibsen, whose name was Transert Ibsen, and I worked during that time with the Norwegian Embassy, particularly to look into the growth and the development for Bangladesh strategic cooperation. So from 80 to 2021, the stage which we have crossed is something magical, I would say, magical. I just want to, because everybody covered and all the positive things, and which is very much there, but I think one thing which is missing is the leadership. The question came up that how did we manage all this crisis? Because we went through a passage of turbulences, particularly from 75, when the father of the nation was killed. From there on, we had to go through a passage of severe turbulences, political turbulences. So one major fundamental issue is to have a political stability. And because of political stability, we are so fortunate that we have achieved so much economically and within the geopolitical process. I just want to mention two things before I end up. The process of decentralization, the process of how to further nourish leadership from the grassroots to the highest policy level is very much needed and which is happening. And because of that, today, we can see the whole issue of transparency, the whole issue of governance, the whole issue of authenticity. And this is very critical, and we are so very proud But I would like to mention that the current is super. The future have a lot of challenges, what you just mentioned, Your Excellencies, about the Cold War II, which makes us very nervous because of many other elements with the global elements which we cannot control. But we can control. The whole thing, we need to invest on the new generation. The youth dividend, that is one very important. And to make Bangladesh make more sturdy, I would say sturdy. Definitely we have to make Bangladesh very sturdy. It is on the rise. But lastly, Zafar, I just want to mention that Bangladesh has tremendous possibilities to establish port. And we are talking about ringgits and Dhaka. I was just laughing by myself. Because if we, in future, and Bangladesh has the capacity, our leader, Sheikh Hasina, has the capacity to think about next 50 years where we can develop port city, which has tremendous potentialities and skilled human labor. So I think you can come up with a very strong strategy where we need to put our fingers now in a very focused way. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It has been a great pleasure.
Thank you. In the front row, if we could.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Tabit Awal. I'm a private businessman, as well as I was the previous candidate for Dhaka North City Corporation Mayor from BNP. I'd like to, first of all, truly thank Dhaka Tribune for organizing this, and as well as the Royal Norwegian Embassy for sponsoring this event and helping us be here. I'm extremely honored to be in front of such a distinguished panel, as well as in front of such an enriched list of audiences. So not to repeat anything that's been said before, I just wanted to, I guess, first talk about how Bangladesh can be a global player and then retreat into being a regional player. So globally, there are many examples that Bangladesh has achieved and is ready to export, I would say, to the world. We already have discussed the NGO and the other systems, but Bangladesh has also taught the world in microfinance. There was a microfinance model that initiated in Bangladesh, and many other countries have then replicated it in their own system and manner. Likewise, Bangladesh has made tremendous progress in lowering infant mortality as well as maternal mortality. Bangladesh has made tremendous progress in creating policies where females under a certain age were educated for free. And children under the age of 5 used to be malnourished. Even that malnourishment rates have come down significantly. These are many, many attributes that Bangladesh can, I think, globally help other nations around the world. And many nations, as far as I know, have already approached Bangladesh. That how did we achieve the MDGs so well? How are we so on track to achieve the SDGs as well in the near future? So that is some place I feel Bangladesh should be a global player. And something to even mention to some of our dynamic educationalists, that at a time where, I mean it still is, but a time where Bangladesh was extremely conservative, we're talking about sexuality and family planning was a taboo, Bangladesh still managed to control its population and bring family planning into the forefront. So that is some other place where Bangladesh should be a global player in helping other societies who may have these challenges to come out of it. The other place where Bangladesh can be a global player is that we sit on top of the Bay of Bengal, and we are run by a numerous number of rivers. So as we tackle sometimes piracy and any other economic hardships, there is the issue of pollution. Bangladesh being one of the vulnerable nations, and Bangladesh being, let's say, a club of weaker nations who do not pollute, but are victims of pollution of majority countries, Bangladesh should now become one of the leaders in pushing back against the polluting part of the world, against the, let's say, the victims of pollution around the world. And in that manner, I'd like to highlight today's Dhaka Tribune's publication, which actually talked about our DOE's pace on creating laws that will reduce plastic and plastic pollution. So thank you, Dhaka Tribune, for that as well. Now, if I can just come down a bit regionally. Bangladesh, not only in the region, Bangladesh globally has the 7th largest voting population in the world. And by the next due election, 2023, Bangladesh will have the 5th largest voting population in the world. That's why it is extremely important that Bangladesh, going forward, and it can, if there is will, there is always a way, it can really rise up to the challenge of showing the global democracies that what a real election, inclusive election, democratic governance looks like. So at this point, there are many allegations about our current democratic system, but it's not broken. It can be fixed, it can be better, and I'm sure it will be going forward, because when you are the 5th largest voting population in the world looks up to you and looks at you to be the example, to be the way forward. And that is a responsibility that Bangladesh cannot escape and it should not escape. The other part is that we talked about our labor. Labor is integrated globally as well. Whether it be domestic labor who produce goods that get exported to the world, or whether it be actual unskilled labor that are going to the world. But the problem currently is that a lot of our labor is categorized as economic migrants. If we talk about the Mediterranean Sea or the borders of Europe, they're known as economic migrants. But we can turn that population into skilled service providers. And that is where, again, Bangladesh regionally and globally can be a player into turning our human labor population into skilled and dignified service providers. Regionally, Bangladesh sits geographically, as we know. If you want to connect Southeast Asia to Central Asia and South Asia, Bangladesh is the option and the only option. Whether it be the road, railway, gas pipeline, electricity grid, or just proper air transportation. It must go over Bangladesh or Bangladesh's airspace. So Bangladesh regionally has the potential to be the connector of these regions of the world, and Bangladesh should be that connector for these regions of the world. Bangladesh was where South Asia SAARC was conceived. And SAARC is a place where Bangladesh can really take the efforts forward to make South Asia much more stable and a more progressive place. And Bangladesh has the potential to always be the peacemaker, because already is a peacekeeper in many parts of the world. The Bangladesh is also very rich in our literature, in our heritage. Therefore, in our language movement and our movement for our independent state, freedom of press, freedom of speech was an integral part of that spirit. So likewise, Bangladesh has many, many publications, online and written, and even television media. So in that, again, it becomes Bangladesh's responsibility to be exemplary nations when it comes to human rights and upholding human rights. And in that region, I'm saying, not only regionally, even globally, Bangladesh can and should be a player. With 170 million people, when they're short of their human rights, Bangladesh can only get better and stronger. And to end my conversation, perhaps this is a maybe direct comment towards Mr. Kazi Nabil Ahmed, Member of Parliament. So I just want to say, bro, with 5 million population, the country of Norway has played the FIFA World Cup 3 times already. So it's about time that Bangladesh wins the SAF Football Championship. I hope you'll look into that. Thank you very much, everyone, for giving this time.
Thank you, Tabith. I think we'll give Nabil an opportunity in conclusion to address that particular point. Could I have Ambassador Karim, I think, would like to say a word? And
thank you, Zafar. First of all, my compliments to you and to the Norwegian Embassy for putting together this event. We are celebrating 2 birthdays. One is the 50th birthday of Bangladesh as an independent sovereign nation. The other is the centenary birthday of our founding father, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. Birthdays to me are occasions when you take stock. How have you survived so far? Why have you survived? And what you need to do forward. And I think in this panel discussion, a lot of those points came forward as to what we are today, and some mention of where we were before we arrived here. I think what we need to take a cool-headed assessment is where we go in the next 50 to 73 or 75 years that are lie ahead of us at the end of this century. And that is where you do a thinking in terms of how do you consolidate the state that was born 50 years ago, the challenges that we had to face as a new nation state, what policies we devised at that time that enabled us to arrive today and speak with our heads held high and you know, as a player to be reckoned with, not just in the world, but in the region particularly. We are looked upon with new respect, which perhaps was not there when those contemptuous remarks made by Alexis Johnson in that closed-door meeting were made. The path set for us was very clear. We are India locked, and that's a huge lock for a very small chest. We have problems, regional rivalry even at that time. Those have exacerbated. We did not have problems in Afghanistan and Myanmar, which are both in the points of explosion. We still have problems in East Asia, and we have, as Farooq mentioned, perhaps a new Cold War emerging, perhaps subsets of that Cold War also in the making. So it is as dangerous a work today as it was, perhaps much more dangerous today than it was when we were born. What enabled us to survive were the basic tenets of the foreign policy laid in the early years, and both I and Farooq had the privilege of being there at that time when we shaped that policy. In a sense, I think this served us well. They enabled us to come where we are 50 years today. Now we need to figure out how do we face those same challenges in a different context, but much more sharper, with much sharper cutting edges and much more pressure that we can bear. I have described ourselves, Bangladesh, as being a very brittle walnut caught in the jaws of two nutcrackers. And the jaws are pressing on us continuously. One nutcracker is regional, the other is global. How we withstand that pressure will depend on how much intrinsic resilience we are able to face. And intrinsic resilience comes not just from you having good economic outputs, etc., or being able to say, I have X GDP per capita. Incidentally, I consider GDP per capita as a false indicator. Okay, it can lead us into a trap. We need to figure out how to sustain the GDP we have and make it translate and trickle down to where it needs to trickle down. And for that, I think what Shafiq mentioned, and he represents the younger generation perhaps, that what is the future that is there for me and my children? For me, my life is at the end. My children are grown up and abroad. My grandchildren may or may not come back here. But the people living here, that's what we need to look at. And I think that we need to now consolidate the state that we created and brought to the state. We need to strengthen the institutions, give them deep resilience, so they will stand up to any number of pressures coming from any direction. And so in a sense, we perhaps need to strengthen our definition of what we meant as non-alignment debt, call it positive neutrality, if you will. That we are friends with everyone. We'll allow you our drawing room to come and sit and talk. We'll offer you a cup of tea and shingara and mishti doi, but come and resolve things peaceably. We will not be peacemakers, we will be peace facilitators. And I think that you need to look at the future in that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, eloquent as ever. Let's hear from some of our foreign friends who are here in the audience. I believe the Egyptian DCM had her hand up, so over there. Mariam.
Thank you. This is Mariam Ragai. I'm from the Egyptian Embassy. First of all, I would like to thank Dhaka Tribune and the esteemed Norwegian Embassy for hosting us today. My question is as follows. As discussed by the honorable panelists, the region doesn't have and needs a security structure, referring in that regard to the necessity of an aspired proactive role of Bangladesh, regionally and internationally. It was mentioned also, big powers has launched initiatives in the region, militarized the region, without consultancy with other countries such as Bangladesh. So, does that mean that Bangladesh is ready to take sides between the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc for now? And is it ready and prepared for the consequences of joining one party against the other? And moreover, what's the vision of Bangladesh in constructing a security organization that is built with coordination with the country of the region in the light of all the challenges the region is facing? Thank you.
My name is Chertsak Virapat. I'm Director General of Center on Integrated Rural Development for Asia and the Pacific. I'm from Thailand. I'm stay here already 17 months and look forward to stay 3 more years. Okay, the SERDAP is an intergovernmental organization hosted by Bangladesh. So we are the Bangladesh platform and mechanism to drive integrated rural development and poverty alleviation. So this is an important platform in order to connect to every country in Asia and the Pacific. At the moment, we have 15 countries. In the future, I plan to include everyone in this region to be SERDAP member. So I hope that you support me in doing that. That is the first thing. The second thing is that we promote capacity building. And we use Bangladesh as the platform. Next year, we are going to organize a capacity building on integrated rural development, governance, trade, and sustainable development. So you are center of this issue, which is a holistic picture of everything. You see, integrated rural, trade, governance, and SDG. So this will cover everything, and so we train the government official of this region. So you are the platform to build up these people, okay? So this is opportunity for Bangladesh. And the other one, we promote the ocean governance. We may organize UNCLOS and its related instrument to you so that you can be the leader in this region. Now come to the panelists. You mentioned mainly on economic, and several people mentioned on the soft power education, and I agree with. Since my target audience are farmers, those farmers are worried about their basic needs. Will they have food to eat? Will they have clothes, their house? And also they worry about future of their children or education and health services. So you have to prepare this in order to be ready for the next step that you're going to be the upper middle income level in the next few years. So these, you have to do it. And I don't touch on environment issue because you all know about it. So you have to be ready in order to move up. So what you have discussed today is a food for thought. And I think you connect in another session in the future. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Opening statement about Bangladesh being at the center of Asia and at the crossroads of many things. Now, I think, Rohini, you had your hand up.
So I had a question and maybe a small comment. The question to the panelists are, a lot of people mentioned Cold War version 2.0 and the general insecurity of the international geopolitical situation. Is it necessarily just a bad thing for our country, or is there a way Bangladesh can use that move away from a unipolar or bipolar to a multipolar world to sort of have options and kind of use that option to benefit ourselves and our positioning as a global player? So that was a question. Sort of related to that, I want to remind that when we speak about Second World War, what happened after the Second World War was in response to the crisis, there was a set of institutions, the Bretton Woods institutions, to provide an economic stabilizing force. And it is now, for the second time in history, that we're seeing infrastructural drive of that scale, led by China, of course, but also Asia. So mainly happening in Asia, that we're seeing financing of that nature. And this is the first time that we're seeing development financing, infrastructural financing, energy financing coming from a place that's also near to where the development or where the borrowers are. So we're seeing sort of a convergence of the borrowers and the financiers, and what that could mean for Bangladesh going forward. This is very exciting time for Bangladesh. We are at the center of many things. Asia is seeing not just a rise in infrastructural financing, it's seeing a rise in demand and markets, it's seeing a rise in population growth. Just in a few decades, most of the world will be living here. And Bangladesh is right in the center of all these trends that are happening. So looking at Bangladesh sort of will give a clue of how the world will look like in just a few decades. And on that note, I think what becomes crucial is that as we get more matured, that our horizon, what we are looking for and what we plan starts getting more matured as well, and the horizon goes forward. Dr. Fahmida mentioned preparation and planning, and that becomes key. I think that we have to be more proactive, not just reactive, not just think of 10 years or 20 years, but start thinking 50 years, 70 years. And we don't really have a choice for that because of the global climate crisis, that our horizon has to be long-term as our baseline keeps shifting because of the global climate crisis. On that note, I think a lot of people mentioned how we are suffering, we are vulnerable to climate impacts. And the answer to that would be looking at how locally we're strengthening our institutions as well. When we are talking about, when globally people talk about movement in response to climate crisis, people think of international movement, but most of the movement that occurs is within the nation, to peri-urban areas, from the rural areas. And if you talk to people, people don't want to move. People move because they have to move. So how we respond to the climate crisis is not just securing the international or planning for international movements, but planning how to better manage the movements within Bangladesh, and maybe in terms of adaptation, how to secure livelihoods in the rural areas as well. So I think going forward, what really we need to focus on is planning, institution building, and not as exciting, but I think there is no other option for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll have one last question sitting next to Rohini, and then we're going to bring it back to the panel.
So we have been working very closely with the youth, and the concern is that I think we are not utilizing properly the demographic dividend. We are talking about China, we are talking about Japan. They are successful economically because they have properly utilized their demographic dividend. They invested in human resource, education, health, jobs. I know that we are the fastest growing economies in Southeast Asia, but it's also true that from the last 2 decades, we have seen the slowest growth in job opportunities. We have less or inadequate job opportunities for 106 million working age people. So it's a very pressing issues. We need to focus more on our education, particularly after the pandemic, because it affected our education system. Many students dropped out, and they are our future. We need to focus on them, particularly on women. I saw news that from a madrasa, almost 20 girls couldn't attend the SSC exam because they all got married during the pandemic. So there are a lot of issues. We need to focus on that, and and need to focus more on education and youth because they are the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a very pertinent point. I wish I could take all of the questions, but like to do one final one. We've got Habibullah Karim here, and then I'm going to bring it back to the panel.
First of all, thank you, Zafar. When I look at the picture behind you, I see that Bangladesh has been painted in the same color as the Bay of Bengal. It might be an indication that climate change will put us under the sea, just jokes aside, but what is important, what all these speakers have talked about, is the strategic location of Bangladesh. If you look at that map, we sit right smack middle of 3 major regional trading powers: India, China, and Southeast Asia. So, and all the speakers have talked about the reasons why we will excel as a country and as a regional and global player. The endowments have been talked about.
are our geographic location and also our people, which has become an asset. But I'm going to talk about a different endowment of Bangladesh, which is not naturally acquired. And that is the Bangladesh's role as an emerging regional digital transformation power. I know it's very strange. Many people will, raise their eyebrows and look at me, what am I talking about? But Bangladesh is actually doing a lot of things under the radar in the digital transformation area. And it started long back, but got a huge boost when the government started their Digital Bangladesh initiative about 12 years back. Just to give you an example of that, this year in October, we had the International Blockchain Olympiad held here in Dhaka. This is an international event on the emerging technology of blockchain, which is going to sweep across the world and change the way we do business. In November, we had the World Congress on IT. This is the largest IT event in the world that was held here, right here in Dhaka. And in January, we're going to have the International Collegiate Programming Contest right here in Dhaka. 3 international IT events happening in Dhaka in 4 months. This has put Bangladesh and Dhaka on the map globally for digital matters. And where we are being recognized as a leader is already in blockchain, in IoT, and even in artificial intelligence. So I would like to look to the future. Of course, we must, leverage our natural endowments, our geographic location, and our people. But we must also leverage this acquired endowment in digital transformation. Thank you. Thank you, Zafar.
Thank you. I think that's a great point with which to sort of finish the audience participation, because of course the big advantage we have is, we can leapfrog many, many decades, and we've already seen that, for instance, a couple of decades ago when we leapfrogged from into mobile phone telephony, leapfrogging the era of landlines, and again we have an opportunity to do that with digital technology, artificial intelligence, blockchain, as you mentioned. That's a really great point. Now, I'm going to bring it back to the panel. Let's go in reverse order. Just please keep it very brief because we've gone over quite considerably. So just 1 or 2 minutes. You may address any or all of the questions someone has brought up if you wish, or you can just give us your closing thoughts. I think, Sherpa, why don't you start?
When we're talking about our importance regionally and globally, recently we've received like a rap on the knuckles from the USA, to be frankly, with these certain sanctions and other things they've been putting. And the reason why I raised this issue, because it does have pertinence to our global and regional standing. So my question is, these it's not a question to be answered, it's just something to be thought about. Does these actions, does this sort of reveal a myth of our strategic value, or does it affirm our actual tangible strategic value? I think we need to think about that, and I think there's no reason for anybody to gloat about it, whether we're in the opposition or it's not a good thing. But I think that we need to think about it in terms of our strategic value, regionally and globally. Thanks.
Food for thought, and as always, probably a discussion like this will engender more questions than we'll have answers. Shafiq Bhai, just some final thoughts as we're winding down. So if you could just take the mic for a minute or two and give us your final thoughts for the morning and afternoon.
I think I have said what I wanted to say, nothing more. But I think look at Philippines, they talk about possibilities, I think, for 5 to 6 decades. They are one time a colony of US, and they are some of the best English-speaking nations in the region. But look at where they are. They haven't solved some of the questions, the idea of justice and some of this. And as a result, look, they are creating monster like Duterte. So do you want to carry, or we will eventually grow into a middle class economy, whatever strength we have, but do you want to be stagnant there? We just or remain like Philippines or lesser than Philippines? At least they are making better money in the Middle East than our people do.
That's a good point. Things to emulate and not to emulate from other countries in the region. And I think it's important that we choose the right path in deciding what is worthy of emulation. I think, are you next up to bat, Nabil?
Sure, thank you very much. I think a lot of interesting questions and points were raised by the audiences, and I do think they give a lot of food for thought. But I still do think the most important thing is how do we define the next 8 decades? One thing I had forgotten to mention was that there is a government plan called the 2100 Delta Plan, which does map all the way natural resources are supposed to be used and how government or other people are supposed to facilitate our growth over the next 80 years, from blue economy to everything else that we're supposed to do. And I think a very good point raised was the digital Bangladesh aspect, because that is actually where jobs are being created right now, right at home for youngsters everywhere. And I do think this is an ongoing dialogue. We are at the cusp of our Victory Day tomorrow, 50th anniversary of Bangladesh's victory over Pakistani occupying forces. And I do think going forward, the younger generation will be stronger for this, for the 50 years of experience that has been given by our previous generations. And I do think we will get better with time. Thank you very much.
Fahmida, over to you.
Thank you. I think the open floor discussion was as illuminating as the panel discussion. A lot of questions and comments have come. I will try to address one or two issues. And in fact, the devil is in the details, as you say. Because we, most of the panelists painted a picture about the achievements of Bangladesh and where we have to go, and also how we have to go. But at the end, Mr. Shafiq has also, deciphered that what kind of, achievements we are making. In fact, if you just go by sector, then you will see that where are the problems. There are a lot of achievements, but at the same time there are a lot of areas where we can work on. So my point is that consolidate what has been achieved and also strengthen the loopholes, the weaknesses. There are two questions I would like to address. One was coming from this 3 challenges, particularly in view of the pandemic. My first challenge, and to address also, to look for, to work together, is that to have a robust health system. Because pandemic is, at the end of the day, firstly, is a health problem. And then across the world, we have seen that how the health system is, how prepared even the developed countries. So in case of countries like Bangladesh, it is all the more important to have a robust health system, and for that we need investment. Investment not in only physical infrastructure, but also soft infrastructure, not in buildings or instruments, but also in doctors, nurses, medicines, so that when a patient goes there, the patient gets a service. And so affordable health service. The second one is making up for the learning loss. That has now various surveys and various experts are telling that we have lost a generation because of these almost 2 years of learning losses. A whole set of people who are not so privileged to have education, online education, they have just, their learning has reversed. And while we are talking about skills upgradation, reskilling, technological advancement, so education is the foundation. So that's another we can elaborate more, but then in the interest of time, we are at the close of the session. The third one is the addressing of the issue of climate change. Many speakers have addressed this, and while we talk about climate change and also coming out of pandemic, we have to look for or work together towards a society which is better than before. So the issue of GDP has been mentioned by Ambassador Tariq Kurmi. I fully agree that the way GDP is perceived and calculated, it doesn't really reflect. But we have a something to, which shows some extent. But we have to work together, and from pandemic we have to build back better. Another just last question I have to, I wanted to answer is that Rohini's issue rightly pointed out the convergence of the donors, of the borrowers and the lenders together, because countries which are borrowing, particularly in the southern countries, they are borrowing at the same time they are also lending. One of the reasons is that the Western or the so-called developed countries, their flow of fund has changed. They are diverting for their priority has changed. Now we are seeing that South-South cooperation has become very important. And South-South, within southern countries, China, Brazil, even India, so all these many Southeast Asian countries, so they have the capacity now and the strength, economic strength, to help other countries. So in future also, in the coming days, South-South cooperation will be very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Closing remarks, Shamsher bhai? And if you want to address one or more of the questions one of the audience has asked, that would be great.
As I think Fahmida has said, that the comments and questions from the audience have been extremely illuminating. As I had said at the closing stages of my statement, that we have huge challenges ahead of us, in spite of where we have come. Because many of these challenges that we face are not created by us. They're created beyond us, and we are forced to having to react to them, whether it is giving shelter to Rohingya refugees, climate change issues, global pollution issues, climate warming. These are all issues emanating outside Bangladesh, and we are having to deal with them. And here there are limitations in that. And the domestic challenges that Shafiq has mentioned, of course, we have to keep in mind. You can be a regional player if your house is in order. So we need also to look at getting the house in order. If you don't get your own house in order, then you are not always taken seriously. But then this is not a perfect world anyway. We all have lived in an imperfect world for a very, very long time, and I guess we'll continue to do so. But as long as we set our targets right, as long as we know what we are looking for, what our goals are, and how do we get there in a very inclusive society, and with an inclusive approach where every voice is heard. This is what we first form, or rather, parallelly. Now, one of the questioners compared the rate of ringgit against the taka, what it stood in 72 and what it is now. In 1971, we did not fight our war of liberation against Malaysia. So I think comparing situation in Malaysia with Bangladesh may not be appropriate, because Malaysia is a massive country. Ambassador Farooq Sobhan has been the Bangladesh High Commissioner there. It's a massive country with not facing a population challenge. It's a resource-rich country. We have none of that on our side. I would rather compare Bangladesh with the country from which we broke free in 1971, and that is Pakistan. And I'll just quote a comment from a Pakistani scholar shortly after the election in Pakistan, when he said that Prime Minister Imran Khan has said he'll make Pakistan Sweden in 5 years. And he said, I'm giving you a request, please make Pakistan Bangladesh first before you make Sweden. And I'll give you 10 years for that, not 5 years. So I think we should compare ourselves from where we came and where we are today. Comparing Bangladesh to a country that is resource-rich, that does not have population pressure, a huge landmass, much, much, much bigger than ours, perhaps is not a fair one. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And so I think the closing statement is yours. So if you could just give us your closing thoughts and address any of the questions which the audience has put, that would be useful. Thank you.
In fact, I'd like to take up very briefly 4 of the points raised during the discussions. I think the the Deputy Chief of Mission from Egypt raised a question about a security architecture. In fact, when SAARC was conceived and over the years moved forward, the focus of SAARC became very much directed at what I would call a non-traditional security architecture, focused on issues like health security, food security, environmental security, human security. And I think the contours of that architecture still remain. Unfortunately, because of the differences within SAARC between some of the countries, we have not been able to take this forward. However, we do benefit from the fact that we are all now members of the ASEAN Regional Forum. And so there is a kind of a quasi-ASEAN South Asia platform where we can address some of these issues. I hope that we can breathe fresh life into SAARC, and in the wake of this pandemic, in my view, regional economic cooperation is going to be of vital importance. Numerous studies have shown that it can add as much as 2 to 3% to our regional economic growth if we can move forward in the process of strengthening our regional economic cooperation. I'd also like to respond to a point of Rohini's. I think our foreign policy should be proactive. We need to take initiatives. In my view is that more often than not, we tend to be very reactive. Things happen and we respond. We need to take initiatives. We can take initiatives. I think what was just mentioned by Mr. Habibullah Karim in the field of information technology and blockchain technology, etc. That's one example. I think in the area of South-South cooperation, we can take initiatives. And indeed, to take up Tariq's point, I think we can play the role of a facilitator. I've mooted this idea many times that we don't need to sort of be on the defensive vis-a-vis our relations with India and China. See if we can play a role of facilitator. After all, people have forgotten that it was in 1998, I believe it was the month of January, when Sheikh Hasina, in her first term as Prime Minister, took the initiative of holding the first tripartite business summit with the Prime Ministers of India, Pakistan, and with her chairing that meeting. And they spoke about connectivity, not simply in terms of road and rail, but energy connectivity and water connectivity and so on. So that is very much possible. I'd like to end with the very first question that was asked, which was by Sobhan, who you may guess is related to the other two Sobhans. The Sobhans tend to be kind of somewhat crowding the field this today. He asked about to name 3 challenges, and I'll conclude with that. I think the one very big challenge is Nabil spoke about the next 80 years. Prime Minister Hasina's, I would say, Vision 2041 has a lot of work supporting that that vision, and I think Fahmida may have her own figures, but some rule of some very approximate figures suggest that during the next 20 years, 2021 to 2041, we need to bring in, Bangladesh needs to bring in somewhere in the region of 10 to 15 to $20 billion of FDI per year in order to achieve Vision 2041. So that's a huge challenge, and we really need to get our act together. And I think one of the things, and that's another big challenge, is human resource development. Really revving up our education system. There were references to that. Addressing this problem of inequality, which was referred to also during the discussions. We have, vocational training institutes in every district, but are they providing the kind of training which can help people get jobs? We've been working in virtually across the country, we meaning the Bangladesh Enterprise Institute, with the youth. And I think their single biggest demand has been jobs. I helped in taking a team of senior government officials, secretaries and additional secretaries to Singapore. And the purpose of this visit, organized by the Singapore government, was what lessons can we impart to our friends and neighbors that could benefit them. And the lesson which I thought was perhaps the most important for Bangladesh, certainly, was the emphasis that Singapore gave from a very early stage to vocational training and to providing very high quality vocational training. So as a young person, you had a choice of going to university and going to a vocational training center, but the salary that you would command would be the same irrespective of which option you chose. And I think that's where we really need to focus. We can't send everyone to the university, but we can send millions of people in and provide them with very high quality vocational training, and that's what we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think that served as a very sort of ample summing up of this conversation. I want to thank all of you in the audience here who've given us your time this morning into the afternoon for being part of what I think was a very eye-opening and illuminating discussion. I want to have a special thanks to my esteemed and distinguished panelists. But as I mentioned, there is the audience, as many of the panelists have also mentioned, has been equally esteemed and have raised the level of this discussion considerably. Special thanks again to the Royal Norwegian Embassy for sponsoring and helping putting together this conversation. And I would just like to say that in conclusion, I hope that we enter our 51st year, that this is the first of many such conversations we have at a national level. I think when we look around, of course, there's much we have achieved over the last 50 years, and I think that's undeniable. But it's also undeniable that there's much which we still need to achieve. And I think perhaps most crucially, a lot of what has worked for us over the last 50 years, over the last few decades, will not necessarily work for us moving forward. The world is not a static place. Our place in the world is not static. As the world grows and develops and progresses, we need to also raise our game. The good news, of course, is that I think in the past few years, we've seen evidence that that is happening. I have a great deal of confidence in the younger generation of Bangladeshis, and when I come into contact with the new generation, younger Bangladeshis, I'm invariably filled with confidence and inspiration as to where this country is going. I think, and this is to the point a number of the panelists as well as speakers in the audience have raised, it's up to us, all of us, at a policy level, at an intellectual level, those of us in the media, we have our role to play as well, to provide those opportunities for this young generation, to provide the means. It could be vocational education, as mentioned by Ambassador Sobhan. It could be job opportunities, as have been mentioned by other speakers. It is up to us to provide those means to this new generation of young Bangladeshis to take Bangladesh forward in the next 50 years. And so building on the gains of the last 50. So with that, thank you very much, everyone.